All right, everybody, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by good friends here at Mile High Sports. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am here. I am ready to break down the Denver Nuggets and the intro presser that they had earlier today for a couple of different guys. The first was Jon Wallace, a new but familiar face that they have brought back to the organization to be the executive vice president of player personnel. That's going to be a mouthful. I'm going to say EVP of PP from now on. That's actually not what I'm going to say because that sounds hilarious, but also super stupid. EVP of player personnel, Jon Wallace, and nice guy, affable guy, interesting personality, somebody that they are very excited about. But they also introduced Ben Tenzer, who is now the EVP of basketball operations. Similar title, similar kind of framing of the title. Not sure why they ultimately did the titling the way that they did. We tried to ask that question, didn't necessarily get a great answer out of Josh from it, but it was a very interesting press conference. And the long and short of it is that all three of those guys on the stage, Josh Kroenke, Vice Chairman Josh Kroenke, Jon Wallace, and Ben Tenzer, are all going to play a significant part for the Denver Nuggets in this upcoming offseason. And they're each going to bring their own strengths and skill sets to the table. Ultimately, the buck will stop at Josh Kroenke and Stan Kroenke. Those dynamics are still relatively unknown and still trying to identify and figure those things out. But I do know that Stan was a little bit more present in some of these discussions than I think has been reported by others. And it's always fascinating to think about these different dynamics, and especially after you're coming off of a season, off of a situation where Michael Malone, Calvin Booth, they don't get along, things get bad. Both guys, I think, can have some major criticisms thrown their way for how they handled certain situations, how they handled certain things. But the words of the day for the Wallace and Tenzer presser, the first one was unorthodox because I called it an abnormal situation, and Josh Kroenke immediately corrected me and was like, abnormal, huh? Not necessarily the word that I would use. I would use unorthodox. And that was the way that he wanted to frame it, the way that he framed the organization. Yeah. Tony B in the comments, who's been very critical, says, I was disappointed by the quality of the questions posed to the Three Stooges today. No one asked Josh Kroenke why Nuggets fans should have any faith in them after failing these past two seasons. Well, those are, I think it's you can go that direction as a media member and say, why should the fans not, like, I know why you're trying to say what you're saying here. I get it. I understand it. This is not the time to make it about the media member. It's not the time to make it about the fans, honestly. It's the time to introduce the new voices and to then see what they're going to do and see, you can't immediately pull the rug out from under them as a media contingent. And I don't think handling it that way would be ridiculous. I did ask multiple questions today. In calling it an abnormal situation, I do think that I got a pretty good quote from Josh Kroenke, who effectively called it unorthodox. But I think that, and this is a quote from Josh Kroenke, I think that, really most everything that has got us to this point has been unorthodox. We've hired first-time guys before, and our best player is the 41st pick in a very unorthodox manner. The way that he plays the game, so everything about us is unorthodox. And then when I wrote in my story today, what isn't unorthodox is the qualifications, I think, for each of Wallace and Tenzer. I do think that both of those guys are qualified, and I come away from it with some pretty good confidence that Denver at least has people in the building that will be able to accomplish what the Nuggets are trying to accomplish. That I have no questions about. And I wrote as much in online, I wrote as much like on social. I don't have that many questions from like for Jon Wallace and for Ben Tenzer. It seems like they have a pretty good handle on what the Nuggets need, what the Nuggets are looking for. But the way that things are being dictated to them is through ownership. And ownership is the one that I actually have more questions with than answers at this point. Um, they're the ones that have set up the structure, which is, I will say it again, it's abnormal. Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean it can't work. And in the past, the Nuggets have set up a structure like this before and actually been pretty successful. The Mark Workentine, Rex Chapman, Brett Barrett Nuggets won 50 plus games every single season. They made it to the Western Conference Finals. They were very aggressive. They were doing everything that they need to do. And I think that structure can at least work where guys are not, you don't necessarily have one person that is dictating everything, one person that's leading all of those discussions. And I don't necessarily think that the Nuggets, like, if one of these guys was hired to do that, whether it was Ben Tenzer, whether it was Jon Wallace, I don't think that they would be well positioned yet to do that by themselves. But I do think that they both bring elements to that, which is one of the reasons why the Nuggets decided to go this direction. So credit to them and credit to the Nuggets for finding what I think is a pretty interesting and creative solution. However, I think the actual root of the problem is not that. It's not those particular issues. It's the fact that the second apron and the way the Nuggets are operating around the second apron, against the second apron, one, not willing to go into the second apron, but two, also being so scared of it and so scared of the implications of it that they're unwilling to take any chances at all. I think that seems to be the more critical point here. But more on that in a little bit. Of what these guys are going to bring to the table, Jon Wallace discussed this. He shared this quote: just my relationships with the guys, relationships around the league. I think the collaboration that we'll bring as a group and kind of being able to galvanize what is going to be, it's going to help me obviously add to my strengths here and kind of empower the individuals that we already have in place. So think about that as structure. Tenzer is actually more focusing on Wallace here real quick. 3 years with the Nuggets as a kind of working in the front office, working in the personnel departments under Tim Connolly. When Tim left, he brought Jon Wallace with him. The first hire that Tim made was Matt Lloyd. I do believe the Nuggets were pretty intimately familiar with all of the Minnesota guys throughout all of this process, whether it was Tim, whether it was Matt Lloyd, or whether it was Jon Wallace. Ultimately, they went with Wallace, and part of that is, I think, from a financial perspective, they didn't want to pay for a large salaried person, somebody that, like, especially if they were going to go with the structure, they did not necessarily want to go with somebody else that had a whole bunch of money coming their way, a whole bunch of power coming their way. But what Wallace does bring to the table, after having worked with Tim Connolly for 6 years, is somebody who is very familiar with the Nuggets. You better believe that even while they were in Minnesota, they're having discussions about Denver. They were talking about Denver a lot. They're figuring things out. It's actually a very interesting answer from Jon Wallace on how they would kind of game plan for the Nuggets, what they figured out, different things they figured out. He didn't give a good answer, but I know that he has one. I know that he has one for sure. And I'm very curious to see how he approaches solving some of Denver's problems from that perspective. But yeah, he's been player personnel. He's been somebody who has been seen as a good eye for talent, but also I think almost more importantly, he's somebody that is respected around the league and has a relationship with a lot of different people. That's something I was worried about with Ben Tenzer. Not that he's not well liked, but just in terms of being able to reach out to different basketball people and they know you and they're very familiar with you and comfortable with you. I think that a lot of people will be reaching out to Jon Wallace in the Nuggets organization and being like willing to talk about various things and maybe even work on some deals, work on some free agency stuff. Jon Wallace is known around the league and he'll be able to get some folks in the door, at least that maybe other folks would not have been able to. But for Tenzer, he says, quote, as an intern, I did every job here. I ended up going to law school, learning about the cap and contracts, managing people. I was the GM at the Grand Rapids Gold. Also, Jon Wallace was for the Iowa Wolves. So both of them, the GMs of the G League teams. Tenzer continues on. So I feel like just us two together in terms of collaboration will be really healthy. Collaboration and synergy and adding to the collective, empowering, like there's a lot of this language. There's a lot of this language that came out of this presser, and it is very interesting. This is going to be just, I think, a very interesting convo. CT in the comments is helping me out. He's saying, apparently guys like D'Lo, Schroeder, Brogdon are going for the TPMLE according to Shams right now. Hey, good thing your boy wrote about it. We'll talk about that soon. Good thing we've got some stuff on tap for the rest of this show. Wallace continued when asked about what the Nuggets need from a margin perspective. Quote, where we have to be really conscious of the margins, we're going to be very deliberate. With Jokic, he's obviously a generational talent in how he helps out and how he elevates the level of play of so many people around him. We've got to make sure we find some more shooting, obviously address some of the defensive concerns, but I think we have both young individuals here that can step up and do that as we continue to develop them. Also, we'll look outside the organization to see what makes sense. So, sort of important, I think. The messaging here from everybody, from top to bottom, is that the Nuggets are pretty close. The Nuggets are pretty close. Agree with that if you want to. I personally don't. But the messaging is that the Nuggets are pretty close, that they have plenty of optionality in terms of like, hey, don't necessarily need that many players to come in and really impact things. Denver has a starting lineup that they really like. They believe in Peyton Watson. They believe in Julian Strother. We'll see what happens with Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson, Zeke Naji, Deron Holmes will play, guys like that. But I do think that if they believe that they are 2 players away, can you get one on the MLE? Can you get one on the minimum? That's probably what they're thinking. And I don't necessarily fully disagree. You just have to really hit on those. It has to be a Bruce Brown level hit in terms of, holy cow, this guy was way better than we expected. You got to shoot for the moon with those kinds of guys. You have to go get a guy that you're not expecting to sign a deal like that and ultimately be very aggressive on that front. In addition, getting another minimum guy that helped you like Russell Westbrook, that would be great. Maybe it's Russell Westbrook. Who knows? But I do think that Denver clearly needs multiple guys. And you could point to a variety of different positions, and I will continue to in the next segment. But lots of interesting things from Wallace and Tenzer in this. Probably not enough in terms of change for my liking. I don't know if they are going to be fully empowered to really explore change. And that to me is where I get to kind of my concerns about Josh Kroenke. He had some very interesting comments today. There's a lot there, unfortunately. They are setting the table for what is a quiet offseason. There are going to be some concerns about the second apron. I personally asked Josh Kroenke, whether the Nuggets would offer a max extension this offseason and if he thought Jokic would accept. This is his direct quote. Quote, "We're definitely going to offer it. I'm not sure if he's going to accept it or not because we're also going to explain every financial parameter around him. Signing now versus signing later, be completely transparent. That's the way we always are. And then he makes the best decision for himself and his family, and we'll support him in it." I laid out in the article today, but I've also said this pretty consistently. It would be best for Denver if Denver gets him immediately. If Denver gets Jokic to sign on the dotted line immediately, because it'll give them the confidence, the flexibility to maybe take a down year and then build themselves back up. I don't know if they fully have that. I don't know if they fully want that. I don't know if there's any worry at all from Josh Kroenke that Jokic will leave. And whether that is right or not, I think that's what it is. Just based off of the way that he's approaching this, based off of the way that he talks about it. Like CT says here, more money if he waits. That is certainly the line of thinking. That is certainly the line of thinking for what Josh is expecting. And I'm not going to lie, he probably knows better than me in terms of what Nikola's feeling is, whether he's going to accept, whether he's going to sign on the dotted line. He probably is. I get worried, and I think Nuggets fans are going to get worried if he waits. And even if it is more financially beneficial to him to wait, the margins are not that crazy. And he would be able to make up for it by signing a new contract kind of like going forward. And then he gets to start that clock even sooner. And by signing like smaller extensions sooner on a more consistent basis, you're always getting to take advantage of the cap rising in those environments. And so I just think that there is at least a world where Jokic should consider signing it sooner. And then it comes down to if he wants to, if he should, if he does feel like he wants to commit to this Nuggets team. It's all fun and games until he doesn't sign it. And he also says that it's not because he wants more money, it's because he's a little bit concerned. And then you start to really have some concerns. But the real quote that went around today was the phrasing that Josh had when it comes to the second tax apron and just how it might force him to look to trade Jokic at some point. Let me just read the full quote to you so that you have the context. This is about the second apron. "I think that for us as an organization, going into that second apron is not necessarily something we're scared of. I think that there are rules around it that we needed to be very careful of with our injury history. The wrong person gets injured and very quickly you're into a scenario that I never want to have to contemplate. And that's trading number 15. So we're very conscious of that pushing forward and providing the resources that we can when the moment arrives. But that second apron, is it a hard cap? I'm not 100% sure, but it's something that teams are obviously very aware of going forward." Mistake, like just a flat out mistake of him for saying anything close to that. You never talk about trading Joker. That just is flat out absolutely brutal. And even putting that out into the ether is just like it's a national story today. It's a national story. I saw multiple national writers pick that up and report on it. And they wrote and shared their thoughts, and it's all about the second tax apron. It's all about the issues that you're facing as a contender, and it's why like you just don't say it. It was phrased poorly. It was just poor words, word salad, word vomit. And I feel for Josh because it's clearly not what he meant. But also it's something that he's probably had to consider. So even if you've considered it, you probably shouldn't say it. So tend to think that, like him says, Sports Center and House of Highlights posted it, obviously, because anytime you can think about Jokic getting moved, you're going to get millions of clicks. You're going to get millions of views, millions of hits. So it's brutal. I don't think that it was meant the way that he said it, but he also has this tendency of kind of saying some things that he probably shouldn't in these kinds of situations. So he's got to be better, like flat out, straight up. That was a bad quote. And I tend to think that Denver is going to like now be at the center of it for at least a little bit. In reality, it's one of the reasons why like he's almost kind of using it as a shield from going into the second apron. You never have to worry about trading Jokic if you never go into the second apron. So hopefully that's not exactly what that means. I tend to think that other teams can go into the second apron and still be very successful, still win a title, still like even if things don't go right. Like Boston is not thinking about trading Jason Tatum right now. Boston is not like maybe they're quietly kicking the tires on Jaylen Brown, but that's Jaylen Brown. That's not Nikola Jokic. Like I just you don't have to, like Minnesota's not thinking about trading Anthony Edwards right now. Why would they? That would be dumb. Like there's just a lot of weird stuff about this. So hopefully that's a learning moment for Josh. Hopefully he's better at this going forward. Overall, odd presser, odd, unorthodox, abnormal presser. There were a lot of questions that were thrown out to different people where it was basically like, hey, this is to you. This is to all three of you. This is to, I guess, Ben and Josh. I guess John and Ben. Like, who knows? It's going to be very weird to figure out who to ask certain things and whether you're just kind of like pitting certain guys into certain things. Like, do I only ask Ben Tenzer cap related questions or basketball operations related questions? Do I only ask Jon Wallace about the roster? What if that becomes a thing? And Ben Tenzer's like, I want to be asked about the roster too. Like, he doesn't have an ego, but eventually if he wants to grow in this business and become a full-time GM at some point, then that's the next step, is to learn that side of the business and be somebody that can consistently answer those things. So it's just a weird situation. So I'm very curious to see how they handle it. I do think it can work, at least in the short term, but this is not a long-term solution, I don't think. And ultimately, what's probably going to happen is this situation occurs for 2-3 years, and then there are either promotions or firings. That would be my expectation. So most likely a 2 or 3 year gamble. And if things go well, then you continue to re-up and restructure. But outside of like, that's just forecasting. I'm not going to sit here and say that I know that for sure, but it just doesn't seem like a situation that's long for the future, though who knows? Maybe I'm wrong. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to talk about a whole bunch of free agents. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be very interesting. We will talk about a whole bunch of different names here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we are back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. Okay. Let's get into this article. This is on milehighsports.com. I'm going to scroll through it for you. You do not have to go there, but if you want to read some of the things that I've got written there, then make sure to go see it. I framed this as, hey, here are 25 guys that Denver should be looking at, that Denver should be considering. And now that everything is pretty crystal clear, it looks like Denver's not going to be making these massive trades, these massive shifts. That could always change, of course, but I wouldn't expect Jon Wallace and Ben Tenzer to be really rocking the boat at this stage. So you're probably just adding 3 guys. Maybe you agree to a buyout with Dario, or you make a trade for Dario and you create a 4th roster spot. But outside of that, this is what you're looking at for Denver. You're going to the multi-year salary cap, um, which has 12 different guys there, as you can see, and 3 different roster spots. For what it's worth, on these two-way spots that are currently open, we saw Trey Alexander there today. We saw PJ Hall there today. Deron Holmes worked out. Peyton Watson was in attendance. He's probably there to negotiate an extension and come basically say, hey, I can be your sixth man next year. I got you. Just pay me like it. And we'll see what ultimately happens in that regard. But right now, 3 years, or no, three roster spots, excuse me. And then the super tax apron space that I've got right here, 10.6 million in space. Denver will be able to do that if they basically sign a taxpayer mid-level guy and they sign 2 minimums. They'll be able to stay under that no problem. So not really concerned on that front. Okay, let's get into this. Honorable mentions first and foremost. These are the guys I wish that Denver could seriously target, but they're probably not going to be able to do so for a variety of reasons. Keon Ellis would be great in Sacramento, but they have such a team-friendly contract on a team option right now. They're probably just going to pick that up, or they're going to decline it, make him a restricted free agent, and then re-sign him to what they think is a team-friendly deal. Similar situation happened to Nikola Jokic when he was a second-round pick back in 2014, signed the contract for 2015, 2018. His free agency came up. He had a team option. The Nuggets declined it to make him a restricted free agent, and then they signed him immediately to a max contract or pretty close to it. So Keon Ellis is probably going to go pretty similar way. Jalen Williams might go the same way, but they're going to have to start thinking about OKC. They're going to have to start thinking about some different things with their roster, with how much like they can pay certain guys to keep the team together. So I'm curious to see for them specifically. Nicholas Batum, player option for the LA Clippers. I would love to get him in Denver. Probably not going to happen. He likes LA. He's very comfortable there. Sucks because he'd be a great Nugget. Davion Mitchell, restricted free agent. Quentin Grimes, restricted free agent. I would prioritize those two guys specifically if it were up to me from a taxpayer mid-level perspective, because they give Denver a couple of different things that they would need. Problem is they're not going to be available for what this is on. So tough scene, but it is what it is. Okay. Home runs for the taxpayer mid-level. These are the guys that I would be thrilled with, and Nuggets fans should be thrilled with if they use the taxpayer mid-level exception on these guys. Karis LeVert, first and foremost, he's probably going to get paid, but every single year there's a guy that falls through the cracks. I wonder if it's Karis this year, especially because the Atlanta Hawks literally just traded for Kristaps Porzingis. They spent a lot of money. They might be trying to be a little bit more aggressive in some other categories as well. It just wouldn't surprise me if they were like, you know what, we can't really afford you because we've got these other guys coming in. You're not going to be a starter for us. We would prefer to have this guy. My guess is that he's coming back to Atlanta, but you never know. So that would be a name like that's Will Barton, but better at this stage and a little bit better defensively, a little bit more in line with what they need at this stage. So that's the guy that I'm prioritizing if I'm the Nuggets. If you can get him in the building, that really helps you. Al Horford, next option there. Bruce Brown, next option after that. I think those guys are pretty self-explanatory. If you could get Al Horford, that gives Deron Holmes and every kind of other backup in the front court for Denver a little bit of breathing room, because you know that Al Horford's going to play. You know that he's going to be able to play either next to Nikola Jokic or behind Nikola Jokic. He's going to do great things. He would be a great second unit center. Have they created enough space below the tax and or with the tax included in order to re-sign Al Horford? I don't know. But with the moves that Boston is making right now, George Niang just became a Boston Celtic. Whether he stays there or not, it wouldn't surprise me if Al Horford, they were just like, or maybe Al is just like, I would like to continue to compete. I'd like to continue to win. I'm not sure if that's the most important thing to him. I think he probably just wants to stay on the East Coast, but if you could sway him, that would be great. And then Bruce Brown. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Bruce Brown. Everybody knows, everybody understands the situation. Would be great to have Bruce Brown back in a Nuggets uniform, period, end dot. He would be, I think, the ideal replacement for Russell Westbrook, not necessarily somebody that you add as well. I personally don't think that Russell Westbrook and Bruce Brown fit together. That's never going to be something that I think. I think that Bruce, especially with Jamal Murray, Christian Brown, also kind of in the backcourt, you don't want another kind of iffy spacer. You want at least one or two of those guys to really be able to shoot. And so we'll see what ultimately happens. But Bruce is somebody you feel pretty good about if he came back. Next, strong options for the taxpayer mid-level. These are not the best options, but they're still pretty good. Taurean Prince, Chris Boucher, Delano Banton, Luke Cornett, and Gary Trent Jr. Those are the five guys that I'm thinking. I really think that is a good different kinds of guys, different kinds of contingent for Denver for a variety of reasons. I'm not sure what the Nuggets are going to prioritize. I'm not sure what they're really looking for. Hold on. Did Shams just tweet that the Celtics are now taking calls for Jaylen Brown and Derek White? Somebody listened to that for me that just came out from Shams so that I don't have to while we're live here. But for what it's worth, like that'd be crazy. Derek White would be great in Denver, but like that's not happening. Nor is Jaylen Brown. But yeah, smaller potatoes, margin moves. Like I said, Taurean Prince, good sixth man, good seventh man, good replacement for Michael Porter Jr. in some lineups if they wanted to play small. If Aaron Gordon was out, you can slide Michael Porter to the 4, play Taurean Prince at the 3, not lose a lot of size. That's a pretty good situation, I think, to be in because it allows you to keep shooting. Taurean Prince, as I wrote here, he had the third most amount of threes on what the Nuggets would have had. Michael Porter had 193 last year. Jamal Murray had 156. Prince would be just fine in a Nuggets unit. He would space in the corner. He would be a lot more comfortable in those situations than Christian Brown often is, and he would let it fly. Not to the degree that like some guys would let it fly. Like he's a little bit more of a, like the shots have to be good. He's more like KCP than he is like Buddy Hield, for example. Chris Boucher, a little bit shaky. The only reason I really included him in this category was because the Nuggets have had prior interest before. Maybe that doesn't continue, but Chris Boucher is somebody that if they wanted somebody who's a little bit bigger, who could play some small ball 5, who could play a power forward role if they weren't sure about Deron Holmes, or maybe they want Deron Holmes to play the 5, then I could see a Deron Holmes, Chris Boucher kind of front court pairing off the bench working reasonably, but who knows? That's not necessarily the way that I would go, but that at least opens up the door for Peyton Watson to be your backup small forward instead, where you then kind of move everybody up a position. And I could see that being appealing to David Adelman. Delano Banton, somebody I really like, versatile two-way guard. The Blazers just traded for Drew Holiday, and I assume that they traded to have him in their starting lineup, but I'm just not sure where Delano Banton fits into that. They might bring him back, but if they don't, he's a guy that I think could fit in, could be a scorer off the dribble, could be somebody who sets a table for other guys. 6'9". You want somebody like that being your tall playmaker off the bench. That's a good situation. He doesn't have to do everything, but he would be able to do some things. And then Luke Cornett, traditional center. If you're looking for somebody to alleviate the pressure off of Deron Holmes, who could definitely play pretty much every single night in Denver, Cornett would definitely be able to do that. It would be giving them an identity with that second unit. And then Gary Trent Jr., traditional 3-and-D guard, somebody who could do some good things on the defensive end, but not necessarily like overwhelming things. He is a little bit small, not necessarily a massive player, but also somebody that I think the Nuggets could need somebody who is a quicker, more physical, shifty guard on the defensive end, because a lot of their guys are like Christian Brown's a little bit bigger, Peyton Watson's bigger. You need somebody who's a smaller defender who could chase around some of those guards a little bit more. That could definitely be useful. Him says the Bucks will bring back Gary Trent Jr. You think they will? Maybe. I don't know what the Bucks are going to do. They are also in kind of cost-cutting mode, and they have some major concerns in trying to figure that out. Okay, the Russell Westbrook tier is next. I don't know if Denver is going to bring back Russ. I actually kind of lean towards them not bringing him back. Nothing that he did or didn't do. I just think that the team is probably comfortable moving on. There are some other options that they have, whether that is just letting Jalen Pickett develop or if there are some other point guards that are out there. That being said, from a value perspective, if Russ was willing to take another minimum contract, Denver's going to be hard-pressed to get a guy for the minimum who's going to be a better value. Like what he provides from a statistical perspective is pretty impressive. And that's just straight up. Like he's a very productive player. It doesn't always translate to impact, but getting somebody that can soak up some of those stats, can take some of that pressure off of Jamal Murray, off of Christian Brown, off of Nikola Jokic, that is valuable, of course. So I do think that there is at least a world where that makes sense to bring him back, but you have to do it for the right price. If you give him the taxpayer mid-level, I'm going to be up a wall. Like it would be the worst usage of that in terms of like they've already done that with Reggie Jackson. Then they signed Dario Saric. If you complete the hat trick and give it to Russell Westbrook coming off of a year where he made the minimum for your same team, probably not the right call from an asset management standpoint. So look, it is what it is. If they feel it's absolutely necessary to have him back, then they'll give it to him. But I don't think that they need to have him back. I think that if the situation is right, then sure. But there are other options, and let's get into some of them. If it's the taxpayer mid-level, D'Angelo Russell, Malcolm Brogdon, Tyus Jones, Trey Jones, Trey Mann. There are other names too. Like there are a bunch of names that didn't make my list. Chris Paul, Dennis Schroeder, Kevin Porter Jr., not necessarily feeling that one, obviously. There are other names out there on the point guard market, and Denver could absolutely get one of those guys for the taxpayer mid-level. It's just going to depend on who. It's going to depend on what the fit is. Fortunately for Denver, every single year their backup point guard has a pretty high usage role because Jamal can play both on and off the ball. Jokic features those guys, plays the two-man game a lot. And you've seen Bones Highland, Reggie Jackson, Russell Westbrook all have pretty high usage seasons with the Nuggets from the second unit point guard spot. So if these guys want to get up shots, they'll come to Denver. Like it's pretty clear, pretty easy to figure that out too. So I'm curious to see what it looks like. But if I had my pick of the litter here for all of these different players, I would probably taking a chance on D'Angelo Russell would be pretty funny. But I'd probably go with Tyus Jones. It's been forgotten how good he actually is because of the situation in Phoenix. He is a good point guard. He is a very good point guard who's been overtaxed in a lot of these different situations. If he goes back to being a backup point guard, I think he'll be really good. So you get somebody like that, you pair him with a reasonable rim roller or Nikola Jokic, and you're going to be fine. Other guys that they could get into TPMLE candidates. Jake LaRavia is somebody that I wanted to mention. Sam Merrill, same thing. Shooters, guys that can do a variety of different things as a spacer. Sam Merrill is actually pretty funny. 368 3-pointers that he attempted compared to 56 2-pointers. So if you want to become a more modern team, if you want a team that is a little bit more 3-point focused, the TPMLE is a good way to add one of those shooters. LaRavia's figured some stuff out. Sam Merrill's figured some stuff out. Another guy who's pretty constant there, Luke Kennard. There's a lot of interesting like white guy shooters that you could get on the market this year. So get your white guy shooter while you can. Add him to Julian Strawther and watch your bench cook. Like that is the method to the madness. Better for the minimum than the taxpayer mid-level. Like these are guys that I like, but not necessarily like perfect values. Amir Coffey for the LA Clippers. I'm surprised he didn't play for them in the playoffs this year. He played 0 minutes. I couldn't believe it when I saw it. But like, he's a good player. And the fact that he didn't play against the Nuggets to me was wild. He can soak up some minutes. He can do a variety of different things. He's not going to be as good of a shooter as what we think Julian Strawther is going to be. Not going to be as good of a defender as Peyton Watson's going to be. He's not going to be as good of a playmaker as Jalen Pickett's going to be, but he's probably the second in all of those categories. So like you want somebody who can kind of connect some different things. He would be pretty good at it. DeAnthony Melton, also somebody I really like, came off of a torn ACL. I think that he would be pretty solid for Denver. Like just somebody who 3-and-D situation has a little bit more to his scoring game than just spacing. But like coming off of a torn ACL, he's just trying to stay in the league. He's just trying to get himself back into the limelight. So better to do that for a team like Denver, a team that could absolutely need him as a veteran. I also really like his hands. Like 3.0, 3% steal rate is crazy. It's one of the highest in league history. And Denver doesn't have enough guys that force enough steals. It's one of the things that if they lose Russell Westbrook, they're going to need somebody else who can get some steals. So getting DeAnthony Melton or somebody like that, that would be pretty great. That would be great for a minimum. Like hypothetically, you get I don't know, let's scroll up a little bit. You get Taurean Prince for the MLE, and then you get DeAnthony Melton for a minimum. That is the start of a really good offseason to me. And why don't you round it off with Paul Reed? That would be sick. You get all three of those guys in there, you're really starting to add to your bench. He barely played for Detroit this past year. He would play more in Denver. I can guarantee him that. He is a pretty solid player who got kind of buried behind a couple of guys, a couple of young guys that they are really excited about in Detroit and guys that definitely deserved it. I like that as an idea. I think that would be great. Aaron Holiday is on a team option, so he's probably not going to leave Houston. But hypothetically, they decline it and they decide to go a different direction. Maybe they're adding another point guard that Kevin Durant likes. Not the worst thing in the world to go get a defensive-minded guard like Aaron Holiday. He's pretty solid. And now you get into your minimum contracts. Marvin Bagley III, a rim-rolling center, a little bit more skilled, not necessarily a great defender, but he's no longer a horrible one. Like he's somebody I think that could play a little bit. He didn't play that much this past year. I think he can play a little bit more than he showed. Isaiah Jackson came off of a torn ACL. What are the Pacers going to do? They're in a really unique situation. I would monitor that. They're also trying to pay Miles Turner. So are they going to play Miles Turner and his backup coming off of a torn ACL? Probably not. So also Tony Bradley really had a good year. So they might decide that they prefer Tony Bradley, might decide they prefer Thomas Bryant. If I said those words correctly. There's a lot of names that they might prefer there. Zaire Williams, I like him as a young guy. Trendon Watford, I also like him as a young guy. Both coming off of the Brooklyn Nets bench. Think that those guys are young, like 23 years old, 24 years old, respectively. I actually really like Watford. Did some stats work on him. 16.6% assist rate in his first four seasons. If Denver's trying to be smarter, adding a guy like him to their bench would not be the worst thing in the world. If they want size and athleticism and untapped potential, they're going to go for Zaire Williams. But like Trendon Watford's not bad. Like that would be an interesting name. And finally, Larry Nance Jr., if you're looking for kind of a veteran minimum center who doesn't have to play every night, but could play most nights, he's somebody that I would consider for sure. Okay, that's my top 25. That's the top 25 list of free agents that I have for the Nuggets. Don't say I didn't warn you. When Denver signs 2 or 3 of those guys, you'll know who you can thank later. I'll be taking my royalties from Ben Tenzer and Jon Wallace for sure. That is a joke. Don't actually make them do that. Or would they? Always interesting to see how this time of year goes. The last time I did this article, Denver signed 3 guys on that list: Russell Westbrook, Dario Saric, Vlatko Cancar. Obviously the Vlatko and Dario signings did not work out. But it was good process. I don't think it was bad process by Calvin that it didn't work out. I just think that they were both cooked. Denver needs to hit on the margins this time. Hopefully Jon Wallace is a little bit better at doing that. He's on short notice. He's got a week. That's all it is. But honestly, a lot of the same guys that they were looking at in Minnesota, probably looking at in Denver too. So will be very interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing what this conversation is like. But folks, that is going to do it, I think, for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends here at Mile High Sports. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I went live for the first time in a while. I'll probably go live for a variety of these just to kind of keep up with the flow of information and how constant it is. I do not want to get caught uploading a YouTube video and then it being out of date even before I upload it, like I did this last time. So I'm going to go live. You'll hear from me after the draft. You'll hear from me probably both days, and I'll be able to share some of my insights for sure. Don't expect Denver to get involved in the draft. That's why I haven't really covered it that much. I talked about it a little bit on the last episode, but if Denver ultimately does, I'll make sure to comment on it. That's going to do it. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I'll talk to you guys very soon.